Están tirando cosas. Cuidado que tiran cosas. Están tirando cosas. No entiendo. Estamos en directo, estamos en directo.
La realidad de España. ¡Grábalo! Esta es la realidad que tenemos. La realidad que tenemos en este país. ¡Grabadlo! ¡Grabadlo! A ver si lo tuviera esta mañana. Luego se río.
So I've received messages from the lad who was violently beaten in this video, and guess what? Just the same as the UK. Any Spanish nationalists and patriots that turned up were stopped, searched, detained, blocked from walking down any road. So the usual kettling tactics. Whilst the Muslim migrants were given free rein to run around with weapons, machetes, sticks, poles, bats, just roam the streets to attack people. Does anyone recognise that? Do you recognise exactly the same as what happened in last summer? As Muslims armed with weapons were allowed in every city to roam freely, with the police saying, oh, all right, lads, just quickly put your weapons back in the mosque. Well, that is exactly what happened yesterday in Spain. It's the same MO. It's police forces that are terrified of the Islamic invaders. Insanity. And that attitude of the police comes from the government body above them. Because we all know that the major high-ranking police officers are just puppet politicians nowadays. Yeah? Like Mark Rowley in London, they're just politicians. They're the same shit. They're chosen, and then if you had, for example, if Spain had Vox as a political party, do you think the police would be freely allowing Muslim migrants to run around with weapons and machetes and attack Spanish people? Do you think they'd be kettling and harassing and persecuting and targeting the Spanish patriots? It's all down to who's governing us, even the way we're policed, every single part of it.
Tommy Robinson's statement is a textbook example of far-right propaganda tactics. Take a local incident of violence and exaggerate it into a global narrative of national betrayal. He claims that Spanish police suppressed nationalist protesters, labeling them as patriots, while allegedly allowing Muslim migrants to roam the streets freely, armed with machetes, bats, and sticks. Robinson's rhetoric paints a clear picture of us versus them, where the native population is portrayed as the victim of both migrant violence and state complicity. He doesn't present concrete evidence. Instead, he frames isolated incidents as part of a broader conspiracy in which governments and police forces have become puppets, serving pro-migrant agendas and ignoring the safety of native citizens. By invoking figures like Mark Rowley in London and referencing the Spanish far-right party Vox, Robinson tries to link this narrative across borders, suggesting that only nationalist anti-immigrant governments will restore order and protect the people. This kind of commentary is not just reporting, it's incitement. Robinson uses emotionally charged language, calling Muslim migrants invaders, to provoke fear and resentment. He manipulates real tensions to promote a worldview where multiculturalism equals chaos and political change must come through the rise of far-right power. His goal is to push the idea that society is under siege, not just by migrants, but by its own leaders. Ultimately, Robinson's message isn't about public safety. It's about political radicalization. By framing law enforcement as part of a globalist betrayal, he primes his audience for distrust in democratic institutions and encourages support for authoritarian, anti-immigrant solutions. This rhetoric fuels division, heightens social tensions, and risks legitimizing vigilante violence under the guise of patriotism.
There's an interesting double-page spread in The Observer today, headlined UK PLC is in a fix. We've got suggestions that the non-dom clampdown is going to cost $4 billion. We've got all businesses, big and small, against the workers' rights bill that Angela Rayner is trying to push through Parliament. And now we've got Downing Street refusing to rule out a wealth tax. How is that going to help growth, Heidi Alexander?
So what we saw in the first 3 months of this year was the British economy outperforming all other economies in the G7, which is the collection of most advanced economies in the world. And so, when we stood for election last year, we said that we would get the economy firing on all cylinders. We're not going to be able to do this overnight. The previous government, the Conservatives, tanked the economy over 14 years. There was stagnant growth during that time. We're not going to be able to change everything overnight. But what I would say, Camilla, is that the fact that we have secured £120 billion of inward investment since we came into office is a sign of international capital looking at the UK as a place where they want to invest. In fact, Deloitte produced a report a couple of weeks ago saying that once we had done that US trade deal, it is actually one of the, if not the most attractive place for global investors to come and set up businesses and expand their operations.
Hang on. The Chancellor herself, back in 2022, tweeted this: GDP figures see dramatic drop to 0.1% in March. We must have an emergency budget. So last week, the economy shrunk by 0.1%, exactly the same figure that Rachel Reeves cited in 2022, calling for an emergency budget. So when the economy shrinks under the Conservatives, it's a national emergency. When it shrinks under Rachel Reeves, everything is going swimmingly. You can't possibly convince people that the economy right now is in a good state when you've even got the Observer, which is left-leaning, saying that the economy is tanking.
So look, GDP figures do bump around from month to month. If you consider the overall picture of the British economy, having secured 3 trade deals, one with the US, one with the European Union, one with India, those are all trade deals that the previous government sought to agree. The Conservatives tried for years to get an India free trade deal and never succeeded. We have come into office and we have done that. When I speak to businesses in my constituency about we had the fastest growing economy out of the G7 countries in the first 3 months of this year. Of course we want to go further.
That was before the April changes kicked in.
More economic growth. So look, we've also, since the election, created nearly 400,000 jobs. We've seen 4 interest rates since we've
Hirings
come to
are
power.
down by 270,000.
Look, when I speak to people in my constituency, businesses and ordinary householders, what they're interested in is, do I feel better off and do I have more confidence in the economy? And so, look, of course we've got more to do, and we are never going to be complacent, because, making sure that we grow the economy so that we can invest in public services, our schools and hospitals, is the #1 priority of this government.
All right.
Camilla Tominey's challenge to Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander reflects a growing public frustration with the government's economic messaging. A 0.1 contraction in May might seem minor on paper, but symbolically, it reinforces the perception that the economy is stagnating, or worse, sliding backwards. Tominey points out the glaring political hypocrisy. When the Conservatives oversaw similarly sluggish growth, Labour figures like Rachel Reeves were quick to demand an emergency budget, painting it as a crisis. Now that Labour is in power, the same metric is being downplayed or brushed aside as a temporary fluctuation. This double standard raises legitimate questions about political accountability and public trust. Voters are not just looking at GDP statistics. They're feeling the real-world impacts: rising living costs, stagnant wages, and reduced consumer confidence. In this context, Tominey's interrogation cuts deeper than just numbers. It highlights the broader issue of credibility. If politicians only sound the alarm when it's politically convenient, they risk alienating the very public they claim to represent.